Well, we should probably get the text put up on the screen and say the bracha because it's almost time.
Okay.
Have we heard from any of our other stalwarts?
Nancy's not here yet, but she might be coming.
Oh, okay. Well, there's Michael. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Michael, still working.
Michael, can you hear me?
I can. I was just, I had my speakers off.
Oh, well, that makes it tough.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
There, I was just asking how you are.
Ah, I'm good, thank you.
You're very welcome.
And
We missed
I am overwhelmed with Zooms. Every political, art, music, spiritual organization I belong to, and there are quite a few of them, they want me to connect.
Now we what can we say? We gotta have you.
It's nice to be in demand.
I think it's true probably for everybody.
I think it certainly, it can be wonderful, but it can also be overwhelming too. And
Here's Marilyn.
yeah. Oh, hi Marilyn, where are you?
We can see you.
I can't see her.
Oh, I could for a minute. There she is.
There she is.
She keeps going underwater.
But her audio isn't on.
No.
Sweetheart.
Marilyn, getting a good shot of the corner of your ceiling.
Yeah,
How are you?
she can't hear us.
Well,
Okay.
Wait, does someone know with the phone and the audio is not on, what do you do?
I don't know.
I go down to the left corner.
You might have to dial in.
Well, I'm not giving the dial-in number, so.
Oh, I see.
Marilyn, I want to suggest that you change the angle of your screen.
I don't think she can hear us. She can't hear. That's the problem.
Wonder if she could see a chat, if somebody wrote something to her in the little chat section.
I don't know. Well, there's Claudia Sanchez. How
Yeah.
are you, Claudia?
Hi, Rabbi Baker. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you. Good to hear you.
Your picture.
Likewise.
Claudia, you were the one helping Marilyn.
Yes.
Oh. She's not able to, she doesn't have any audio yet.
Is she in right now?
Yes.
Her name is on there, and we've seen her a few times, but we can't hear her, and she can't hear us.
Her video is off and her audio is not connected according to the participant screen.
Okay, let me try calling her. I'll come back.
Yeah, maybe you could have her reconnect and be sure when it says, do you want to connect by audio, that she clicks yes or clicks it.
Yeah, we went through it a few times yesterday, but
Yeah, I know you were helping her.
Yeah. All right, I'll come back.
Okay. Well, let's wait a minute or two and give Claudia a chance to
Muted.
do that, and then we'll start.
And Michael has a wonderful question.
Oh, okay, Michael, what's your question?
Hear you.
So Kerry and folks, I missed last week's live presentation, but I listened to it, and it was quite interesting to watch how I wanted to participate, but I couldn't quite.
That's great.
Well, I'm sorry you weren't able to participate, but this week you were able to overcome whatever problems you had?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. The problem, it was a work meeting, so that's
Oh, yeah. Well,
That's not the question.
that's not the question.
In our time.
So, but I had an opportunity to think a little bit about when these stories were first written and
Yes.
people studied them, and there are people other than us that are studying.
Oh, yes, yes.
Is the method that they use similar to the method that you are using, or do they have some other way of interacting with the material?
Well, let me say that I have a way of looking at a literary text, which is really fundamentally connected with my notions of literary criticism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do. I think I bring lots of other things into it, associations of various images with the Jewish tradition and so on and so forth. But my basic approach is what used to be called back in the ancient days, explication de texte, which is a species of French literary criticism that I have been brought up with. So the kind of questions I ask and the kind of issues I raise are connected to that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're asking whether or not a bunch of Bratslav Hasidim are
Mm-hmm.
doing explications of the text, the answer is probably no. However, one of the reasons that I do take the approach that I do is that it is very compatible with how Rabbinic Judaism reads texts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not explicitly the way the Jewish tradition reads a text, but it has very strong affinities.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's probably the best
Okay.
answer I can
Okay, that's great. That's great. Thank you. So a follow-on question, though, is that when we first started this course,
give.
we talked a little bit about studying Mussar and some of the aspects with which we can look at ourselves. And I'm struggling a little bit with the relationship with that idea and how we do that, and this particular story and the methodology we're using to go after it.
I think that that is a wonderful thing for you to bring up, and it just demonstrates that great minds think alike. Because I was thinking about exactly that kind of question, and that we were at the right point in the story for me to raise the issue for our general discussion of how the story is an exemplar of the principles of Mussar, and particularly how Nachman of Bratslav was influenced by that approach, and it is very present in his stories, including this one.
Mm.
So we reached the point now in the story where I thought we were, it would be very helpful for me to explicitly try to make that tie-in.
Great.
So that was part of what I had in mind for doing today, Michael.
Great.
Okay. All right, looks like most everybody is on. Am I right about that?
Yeah, except for Marilyn.
And is Marilyn going to be with us, or we don't know?
Yeah, I explained to her how to join with video and audio, so she's reattempting.
Okay. All right. Well, I think considering the fact that we have a limited amount of time, we ought to say the bracha and start in, and Marilyn will join us as soon as she is able. So if you would put the text up on the screen, thank you. And you can help us find the point in the text where we left off last time, Kim. That would be very good. And you can all participate in the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav,
V'tivanu
la'asok
divrei Torah.
Amen. Okay,
This is the Palace of Pearls.
Yes. This
right.
is where we heard.
All right, so now we're at a stage in the story where we have moved from the open-ended exploration that marked the beginning of the story, and now we're beginning to enter into a city. we're now moving into a section of the text which has to do with the social and communal aspects of the search by the servant or the minister. And that raises the question which Michael was anticipating, namely, once we move out of the realm of the individual quest and move into the realm of the larger society, we're now asking for the application of the text in a social context. And that is the first and underlying position that is part of the notion of Mussar, of how we improve ourselves, how we develop in terms of personality and ethics and so on and so forth. Because all of those questions require a social context. You can't really talk about ethics if you are the only individual that's involved. It's true that Sartre says that hell is other people, but it is also the case that other people are the precondition for there to be ethical pursuits. So in the context of personal development, we start with the assumption that it is we as not entities in splendid isolation from other human beings, but within a social context that we are who we want to be. So now we are beginning to enter into that portion of the story where that's exemplified. Am I being clear to everybody?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. All right, so we're now going to move into what it means for the servant or the minister to have become connected with the social context of his life and what is being required of him by the princess. Okay, so let's start with the paragraph that begins, "Now few strangers," and we'll read that paragraph. Somebody would be willing to do that for us, and we can go from there.
Is that where we really are?
I think
Yes.
so.
Okay.
Am I wrong about that? It could be.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's where we are, right?
Okay.
Yes, because I'd asked the question about the evil one. And how
Oh,
could
that's
that
right,
be
you did.
Palace of Pearls, but yet it's the evil one's palace?
Yes, yes. Okay, you're right. I promised to address that at the beginning.
Yeah.
So let me say something briefly about that, but it's going to be expanded upon as we read the text. Look, in Judaism, one of the central things that distinguishes it from some other religious traditions is that we don't write off, how should I put it? We don't write off evil. We have what this notion is, it's called the inclination for good, the Yetzer Tov, and the Yetzer Ra, the inclination towards evil or wrong. In a lot of religious traditions, the idea is to distance oneself from Ra, from evil, and to embrace the good. They are antithetical. But in the Jewish tradition, while they are certainly different from each other, they are not antithetical, because the inclination towards Ra, towards evil or bad, is redeemable. In fact, it's not just redeemable, it is essential. So the point from the human endeavor is not to somehow act as if evil doesn't exist, but to redirect it.
Mhm.
So there are all sorts of inclinations that we have, which we might include under the rubric of Yetzer Ra, the inclination towards evil, but which are in fact the fundamental basis of things that are required and good. So for example, we don't eschew sexual relations. We don't say that sex is somehow essentially bad and that it should only be engaged in if it can be suppressed. On the contrary, we think that that is a natural human inclination, and the idea is to direct it in such ways that it is going to lead to the good things that we think life ought to be characterized. Without the inclination to sex, we would not have families, we wouldn't have schools, we wouldn't have all sorts of things that depend upon the sexual urge to be a part of our lives. We don't try to purge that. We try to direct it in such ways that it creates institutions like the family or like schools or what have you, which are of essential value. We don't say that sex is dirty or to be avoided, but it is to be channeled. And that's because, from the Jewish point of view, sex is a good example, greed is a good example, and so on and so forth. All of these things are inevitable and ineradicable qualities in human nature. We can pretend they don't exist. We can try to act as if they don't exist, but those efforts are doomed to failure. The direction that Judaism encourages us to take is to channel them in such a way that they lead to social good, or for that matter, the institutional good. So for that reason, the idea of there being a palace of the evil one is not necessarily a scary idea. The evil one or the palace of the evil one is where this transformation or this channeling takes place. Am I being clear?
Yeah. Also, we've talked before about the story of Job, and the role of the devil in Job, and how it's kind of it's your faith is not tested unless the purpose of the devil is to make your faith more solid.
Well, yes, and I think because the encouragement is for us to find a place within ourselves, within our society, for those inclinations that otherwise, if they were not directed properly, would be a real problem. So the issue is to figure out how to redirect them, not to pretend they don't exist, but to say, yes, it is in the interaction with these negative inclinations that, in fact, we are made stronger and we are able to improve. So this is one way of looking at, since you raised the question, Michael, how it is that we're now moving into an element of the story, which is about how how self-improvement, how personal growth, and so forth requires us to deal in a positive way, if I can put it that way, with what is both good and what is negative in life. So Mussar is not about eliminating what's problematic, it's about overcoming it. It's about transforming it. So the bottom line in the notion of self-improvement is that we don't try to distance ourselves from what is wrong or what we fail at, but to embrace it in a way that allows us to learn from it. This is not necessarily true of all religious or personal development disciplines. I'm going to stop there because I want to get to this particular paragraph. So I'm going to ask somebody to take that on and read it for us.
I can do that.
Okay.
Now, few strangers had ever entered this city, and once they had been admitted, they were never permitted to leave again, nor could any of the other inhabitants depart. For this was the hidden and secret palace of the evil one, from which he cast his spells, like the spell that gave him power over the lost princess. And he had kept the existence of that city and palace secret for many centuries. So when the wind set the minister down before the gates of the city, the guards refused to let him enter. But he dipped his hand into the magic pouch the first giant had given him and bribed them with gold coins, and thus he managed to enter the city after all. When he went to the market to buy himself, then he went to the market to buy himself food, for he had to tarry there, since it required much thought and wisdom to set the princess free.
Okay. So we begin with this idea that being in the palace of the evil one, oddly and counterintuitively, is something that is important and even good to do. And that once you are in it, you can't escape. This is a lot like life. You enter into life and you are, to some degree, captive to the drives, the inclinations, the appetites, and so forth that are part of being a human being. The idea is not that you can somehow eliminate them or you can somehow escape them. You can't. They are a part of life. They are without escape. So what do? If you can say, all right, you should try not to follow this inclination, but in the end, that is not ultimately sustainable. What you have to be able to do is to embrace it in such a way that you can live with it. You're going to be there for a while. You're going to be in this place called the Palace of the Evil One for the foreseeable future, and you better get food and so on and so forth so that you can survive in that environment. Having said that, what do you take to be the significance of the use of the gold coins here? I'm sorry, I can't hear whoever's speaking. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I don't know what that is.
It's someone's background.
Someone's speaking in the background.
Oh, okay. So what is the significance of the gold coins? I mean, the servant or the minister bribes his way into the palace of the evil one. I mean, somehow it's very important for him to be there, and he will in fact take some of the gold coins that he was gifted in order to enter into it. Doesn't that seem kind of counterintuitive? He's bribing the guard to this palace to be able to enter. Somehow there has to be some positive instrumental value to being in the orbit or being inside this evil palace.
Well, he's doing it to set the princess free.
Right.
But isn't it unethical Isn't it unethical what he's doing?
That is a good question. Is it?
Why, I don't understand why.
He's using his gift. He was given the gift,
Yes.
and he's using the gift. If you have gifts, you use them.
Do you mean because it's a bribe?
Yes.
Well, that is a good question. Why would he bribe the guard to let him get into the city?
To free the princess.
That's the only way in.
Because he
The only
can't.
way in, right?
Yeah.
And somehow being in this palace of the evil one is a necessary step in freeing the princess. And in
But
fact,
I guess Michael kind of is asking, does the end justify the means?
Right. Exactly, Kim.
well, that's a good question. And the answer, it seems to me, from my point of view, is that this is a good example of how you embrace and transform the Yetzer Ra, the inclination towards evil, into something good. You have to enter into it. You have to embrace it in order to be able to change it. What you can't do is stand outside and, what do I say, protect your purity. You have to get inside in order to be able to get involved in this process of transformation. And the gold coins, which we would think, okay, well, they're given for a specific benign purpose. Somehow or other, bribing the guard to the palace of the evil one is seen as a proper use of these magic gold coins. I think most of us would probably say intuitively that must be wrong. That bribing to get in, doing what you must do to enter into the palace of the evil one, is something that we should avoid, but not really.
The gold coins were a gift, as Stephanie said, and they become a tool. The
Yes.
gold coins are a tool in order to get you further on in your quest, or the minister on his quest.
Yes, and particularly part of that quest is entering into the palace of the evil one.
Now, there is an interesting aspect. If you think of the palace as the palace of the evil one, then everyone there should be corrupt as well. And therefore, you're using that aspect of corruption for you to get in. Now, how does that then translate into our own inclinations, which we might call evil? That is, how do we accept them or enter into them in a way that allows us to transform them or to just accommodate who we are to that? An example might be overeating.
Yeah.
Or just eating. Well, that's a bad example. Never mind.
No, I don't think it's such a bad example, Michael. I mean, you can say that underlying eating is something I struggled with all my life. You have to eat to live, so to speak, right? But how you manage it, how you direct it, is the crucial issue.
Right.
So, and that applies across the board. So there are all sorts of qualities or inclinations that require us to enter into them. We have to somehow incorporate them in order to be able to transform them, whether it's sex or eating or fear or all sorts of things. And
Or anger.
I'm sorry?
Or anger.
Anger is another good example, you bet. And the thing is, there are all sorts of boons that depend upon the existence of these seemingly negative inclinations. Anger is a good example. Food is a good example. There is pleasure in eating food. It is a part of the enjoyment of God's gift of creation.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why, from a Jewish point of view, oddly enough, we can debate this, there's also things to be said. From the standpoint of traditional kashrut, being a vegetarian is not such a great deal. Why? Because eating meat is one of the pleasures of being a human being.
Mm-hmm.
The animals were given to us along with vegetables or food, and to reject it is not entirely clearly a good thing from the standpoint of respecting and accepting God's gift. Having said that, there's all sorts of counter arguments, but that's the traditional thinking. Similarly,
So
anger
just getting back to this story, though.
yes, right.
Being willing to do the things that might in other cases be called evil are important, but to do it with an awareness of it, with the purpose of transforming it, or of
Yes.
Transforming isn't quite the right word, because you don't eliminate it. You just don't have it rule what your actions are.
Well, it takes a different form. I mean, let's take the example of anger. Okay, often we would say that anger is in and of itself is a bad thing. But if it's directed properly, like you get angry when you see injustice.
Mm-hmm.
Can't we use the example of what's going on now with protests? There are all sorts of good people who are angry and they're protesting and they want change. And so they're using their anger to channel it towards, channel something, we hope, towards change.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good example, absolutely. So you wouldn't want to forbid anger. You want to use it in a way that's transformative to help with achieving the laudable goals that we are meant to pursue. So from that standpoint, it's not something we want to eliminate. We want to use properly. This is sort of the general approach that Judaism takes in many different domains. For example, I've just been reading today a lot about environmentalism, and the Jewish value that undergirds the environmental enterprise from a Jewish point of view is the idea of not misusing the gifts that we have received from the environment. It is to say that we have a whole range of factors, of entities, of things, of qualities that are part of the world that we have inherited, that we have received. And the job we have as people who want to be good stewards of the environment is to make sure that these various things are not misused. There isn't necessarily one way of doing this. It could be a lot of different ways. But whether it is natural resources related to forests, or the use of the land, or any number of other examples, the issue that we are faced with, we have to struggle with, is how do we use these gifts in such a way that the use is consistent with the larger goal of being stewards, of being using well what God has given to us, God has provided us with. It is not to say that there are some things that one may not ever use, or that one could never imagine a proper use for. I think that's where, in some ways, Jewish environmentalism is different than the general theory about it. Not to say that one is right and the other is wrong, although I do think that one is better and the other is worse. That's just me. But what I'm saying is that the bottom line in terms of dealing with things around us in our environment and in our world, and not only things, but people, is to follow the dictum that we have from Kant, which is that you have to treat those you encounter or what you encounter as an end and not a means. That is to say that it is not that we don't use things or even other people, but that is not the end of the process. So, yeah, go ahead.
Another factor here that I would argue kind of with Michael is in terms of the bribery is that there's two laws that we kind of obey. One is, I guess you could call it God's law, and the other is a law of the particular circumstance, which would be the evil law.
Yeah.
And like if you had an SS guy knock on your door and said, "Are there any Jews there?" you would lie to him, hopefully, or you would, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's Kant's categorical imperative. I mean, can you universalize the behavior, or is that not a possibility? And there are all sorts of behaviors that you can universalize, even though in and of themselves they may be problematic. I mean, I think the point here is that in order to enter into life, you cannot avoid entering into the palace of evil.
Mm-hmm.
That is a part of experience. And entering into that is a positive, what's the word I'm looking for? Injunction.
So the dilemma is not setting the princess free or bribing. If you could reduce it to that choice, which is the worst of the two evils?
You have to be in a position to have an impact. And that means you got to be where the impact has to be made. And that means that you're not going to be able to do this from some distance so that you are not sullied or you're not contaminated by the world around you. The idea is you have to enter into the world around you and change it, but that means you have to be a part of it. That's the much more difficult pathway to follow. So, I think that I think I understand your point, Michael, and it's not that I don't take it as being fundamental. I think it is fundamental, but it's fundamental in the sense that it is not possible to follow that inclination completely without making room for what is difficult or wrong or evil or unethical as part of what you have to contend with. I don't think you can hermetically seal yourself off from the nastiness of life. This is kind of what I would put it.
Rabbi.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things I'm thinking is, to me, the bribe, it doesn't seem so much a bad thing as it's the price you pay to get in. And that when you're thinking of it spiritually, that in order to be willing to go someplace to have a transformation, you do have to get rid of something that you have already. You have to be willing to let go of something in your life or your possession in order to be able to be ready to go into that place where transformation is going to happen. And I'm thinking about old myths. I'm thinking about Harry Potter being willing to die, giving that's the price you pay, not so much an evil bribe, but it's the price you pay to be able to move forward.
I think that there's a lot to be said from that point of view. I would only add one little point of fine tuning, and that is that entering into the world necessarily means entering into a world that is morally and ethically complicated. And you can't really enter into it unless you acknowledge and deal with the complication that life entails. You know, sometimes I think about how this can lead to all sorts of practical sorts of failures. I mean, we're all thinking about the upcoming election and the point of view that many people have, especially on a certain segment of the Democratic Party, which basically says, if you don't agree with me down the line, X, Y, and Z, from a liberal or progressive agenda, then I can't support you. It's the argument against Joe Biden. It was the argument against all sorts of people. And it almost led us into, in my personal opinion, and there's nothing more than that, nominating candidates who might be pure from an ideological point of view, but who would have led to electoral disaster. So I guess what I'm saying is the complexity of life is something that we have to accept and deal with, and that involves all sorts of things that we may wish we could avoid, whether it's moral compromise or recognizing the complexity of a moral situation or of a relationship or what have you. I don't have a clock on my screen when we're in this mode. Can somebody tell me what time it is?
12:40.
Yeah.
12:40. Yeah, we have a little bit of time. So
And we have to end at 12:58 today.
12:58.
Started her.
Okay, I'll bite. Why do we have to end?
Because I have a class at 1.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll do our best. Okay, so let's just take a moment to read the next paragraph, if that's okay, and we'll get as far as we get. Somebody take that on?
I'll go. Now, when the minister came to the market, he saw a servant who bought all of the fruits of a vendor. And after the servant left with them, the minister approached the vendor and said, "Surely all of those fruits cannot be for a single family." And the vendor replied, "Of course not. They are for those who live in the palace of pearls on the top of this mountain. For the king sees to it that the finest foods
Yes. Okay.
are selected for those who live there. And today the king's servants judged my fruits the finest, and that is why he purchased them all."
Okay. Okay. We can read through the next 2 short paragraphs. All right.
"Tell me," said the minister, "who lives in the palace of pearls? For I'm a stranger here and I don't know." The vendor replied, "Only the king and his servants, as far as I know, although it is rumored that a princess also makes her home there. For the king selected 12 ladies in waiting from among our daughters and took them to live in the palace where they are said to serve her."
Okay. Let's stop there. So, I mean, we're not going to get too far here because it's more complicated than might first appear. What is being said when the finest fruits are reserved for people who live in the Palace of Pearls? Why are they somehow especially worthy of that?
Well, they're the king. I mean,
Right. And what do you offer the king?
your best.
Yes, sure. This is the idea we've encountered before with regard to the sacrifices in
Right,
the temple.
right.
You know, in the story of Abel and Cain, one offers just whatever he happens to have around. The other offers the best. And that is what you offer the king.
Right.
The king being not just some flesh and blood king, but the king of all the world, so to speak. So who is it who's living in this palace? Palace of Pearls. This is the, as it were, the abode of the Holy One. Praise be God.
God and the Shekhinah.
Yes, exactly so. So that you sort of jumped right to the punchline, Michael, which is if it's God and the Shekhinah, then who is the princess?
The uniting of them.
Well, I think it's more specifically the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is the princess, and
Okay.
you know, that's my view. I mean, there are other possibilities. Don't misunderstand. But that's who lives in this elevated abode. What's interesting, it seems to me, among other things, there's not only one thing that's interesting. The princess makes her home there, but where is the princess so far throughout the story?
Not found.
Not there. Who knows where she is? The minister is searching for her, but she's not where she's supposed to be. What does that suggest? What has happened to the Shekhinah, God's presence?
It's been abducted by the evil.
She's become hidden.
It's been exiled, it's been abducted, it's been kidnapped, whatever you want to say. Somehow or other, God's presence is not where it's supposed to be. It is in some other locale. And what our job is to find it. It's somewhere. We're sure it's somewhere. We're so sure it's somewhere, even though all the requisite authorities say that it cannot be found, we continue to search for it. It is somewhere, and it's our job to find it. This, you might say, is the task of the Jew, but it's more than that. From the standpoint of the individual, what's the analog of the Shekhinah, the presence of God? If we're thinking about ourselves as individuals.
The soul?
Well, in order to find the Shekhinah,
Yeah,
we actually have to go into the evil place within ourselves.
that's right. It's somehow within us somewhere.
Yeah.
That's one of the places you have to look.
But,
So
but
therefore,
it's hidden by the evil.
yes, it's hidden by us, ourselves. We are the palace of the evil one. The evil one, as it were, lives within us and obscures. It has abducted. We ourselves have abducted the presence of God, the presence of the Shekhinah. And going into ourselves, going into what we have within ourselves that obscures and hides the Shekhinah is what our job is. This is the purpose of growth and development. To see what is behind and underneath and around those things that obscure what is best about us. It's there somewhere, not easy to find, very difficult, very hidden, and requires a huge amount of entering into those very things that are part of who we are, but which obscure the kind of people, the kind of human beings we want to be. that's why the main process of Mussar is a fearless examination of those things that we do day to day, which are in contravention of the principles, the 56 or whatever the number is, depending on your count, principles or values or midot that that are part of the agenda of spiritual development in Mussar. So this takes us to the question that Michael wanted us to deal with at the beginning. And I know we're at the end of our time because
No, we have 9 minutes.
Oh, we do? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So having said that, here's the thing. All of these qualities, these midot, are things we can examine, but the examination is most useful when we start from the position of how it is that we have not expressed or exemplified those qualities in our life. You start by saying, how is it that I have, on the one hand, followed through on these midot, but even more importantly, how is it that we have failed as individuals, as people, as communities, to have exemplified or embodied these qualities? That is the basic position of the person who is involved in the process of spiritual development. I wish it were something where we could say, oh, here is a principle. All you have to do is believe in this principle. All you have to do is espouse this principle. But that's not how it works. And by the way, this is a notion that is not unique only to Judaism. Anybody here familiar with no, the name just went out of my head. The examination, the principles of, what's it called? Hey, I just lost my thread. 12 steps. How do you start the 12 steps?
12 steps.
Sorry? Yeah.
How do you start?
To start off by fessing up to whatever it is that the issue is. And
Yeah, you start with, I think the language he uses, you have to do a fearless examination.
Well, that's a little further on, but yes, it is part of the process.
Yeah. So you have to look at yourself and who you have become and examine yourself in a very merciless way. Well, I don't know if merciless is the right term, but you have to start with the idea that self-examination is how the process begins and how it continues to move forward. Each of the steps is marked by this kind of examination. You know, it's not as if when we're dealing with Mussar that no one has ever heard of these ideas anytime else in human history. That's very rarely the way spiritual development takes place. The way it takes place is that we have a language that we use, which comes out of our tradition, comes out of our history, comes out of our texts. And there's a certain kind of overlap. There are certain features that are unique, but there's a certain level of overlap as well. And so you're going to find some things in Mussar that are related to or even identical with principles in other traditions. This is a good example.
So, Kerry,
Yeah.
the Alcoholics Anonymous and the other 12-step traditions
Yeah.
come from a very Christian background. And one of the steps that you were referring to, the exact words are, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
Right.
And then when you get to the bottom of them, it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And so
Yeah.
this is actually, it's not just a program to free yourself from whatever addictive behavior it is, but it's actually to have a spiritual awakening of some kind, whatever that means.
Well, it's not defined in a very exclusive sort of way. But yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what is common in both traditions. I mean, we have this idea of Judaism, which is termed Seshbon HaNefesh, which means an accounting of the soul, a tallying of the soul.
Yeah.
And this is the sort of the generic way we describe what it is that we do, particularly during the high holy days.
Mm-hmm.
You look at yourself in a very strong and the Hebrew word would be charif, very spicy sort of way, you know. That is what we should be engaged in, particularly at that time, but not only at that time.
Right.
So it should not be comfortable. It should not be easy to do. For that reason, this is one of the ways that Judaism accommodates that point of view is by emphasizing equally the personal and the individual examination and the communal examination.
Mm-hmm.
When we deal with the confessionals, say at the High Holy Days, they're couched in the plural language that represents community.
Right.
Because it is easier to get over that hump to say, I have done this, if you're there with 88 other people who are also saying, I have done this. You know, so that's part of how you begin the process. It's to overcome the inertia of being afraid of admitting what one's errors and failures are. We do need that to a certain degree. So having said that, you can see why it is important from the standpoint of Nachman's presentation in the story that entering into the world of moral ambiguity, of taking responsibility for our complicated moral and ethical behaviors is in some ways the essential step. That's what we are asked to do, and that is what leads to growth. I've used this idea many times in our conversations. This is the sand, the grain of sand in the oyster. It is the result of being irritated. And we are irritated when we realize how it is that we have failed, that we have not met our mark. And it is the irritation that results from realizing that this is part of who we are, that beauty is and meaning is created. And in fact, leads to the Palace of Pearls. We're going to talk more about what this Palace of Pearls means, but I think we're going to stop here for today so that Kim can make his class. And I hope this was helpful to all of you, and we'll talk some more next Friday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being part of this. You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Shabbat Shalom.